My son tried to kick me out of my home to finance his dream house and start his own family. I am 65 years old, a single parent, having spent the past 32 years alone. Eleanor, my wife, died while our son Mark was just 3 years old. She got in an automobile accident on her way home from work. Hence, the loss was abrupt and terrible. We were a happy family of 3 one minute. Then, I was left to raise our small kid by myself. Early on, those years were really demanding. At the time, I was a high school English teacher, and suddenly I had to balance my employment with full-time parent duties. On evenings when I would sit on Mark's room's floor observing him sleep, I would wonder how I would handle it all. Still, we managed daily to make it work. Over the years, I gave up a great deal. Promotions that would have needed more travel or longer hours were declined. Mark always came first, so I missed out on social events and dating possibilities. I never, however, objected to it. Mark was my universe. Seeing him develop into a content, healthy young man made all the difference. Things grew simpler in some respects and more difficult in others as Mark aged. While the emotional obstacles of parenting a child were more pronounced, the practical ones became lessened. Mark began to probe about his mother more, and I tried to preserve her memory for him. Together, we would review picture albums, and I would share anecdotes about her. Though it was complicated, I wanted him to know how much Mom had loved him. Mark and I had a wonderful connection in spite of the obstacles. We were great buddies, not only father and son. We both loved sports, especially baseball, and some of my best recollections are of teaching Mark to throw in our backyard. We used weekends for hiking or camping as he grew older. When Mark was admitted into a decent college, I felt really proud. Watching him pack for his dorm room was mixed, but I was happy for him to begin this next phase of his life. Over his college years, we kept in close proximity. I loved those talks, as he would call me for guidance on everything from his studies to girl problems. Mark returned home after college in search of work. He ran across Chloe during this period. She came from a rich background and was clever and attractive. Though at first I was glad Mark had discovered someone who brought him great delight, over time I began to see changes in his conduct. Always talking about the beautiful places Chloe took him to or the costly gifts her parents bought, he grew increasingly preoccupied with worldly objects. Reminding myself that Mark was a mature man entitled to live his life any way he wanted, I tried not to let it disturb me, but the sensation that he was transforming into someone I didn't know persisted. Though I had reservations, I was glad for Mark and Chloe when they declared they were getting married. Though Mark insisted Chloe's parents were paying for everything, I volunteered to assist with wedding expenses. The wedding was an opulent event, considerably more grand than anything our family was accustomed to. Among Chloe's friends and family, I felt awkward, yet I put up a courageous front for Mark's benefit. Mark and Chloe moved into a lovely property in an affluent area following the wedding. That was quite different from the little house Mark had grown up in. Occasionally, I was asked there for supper, but in their contemporary house, I always felt like an outsider. Chloe was courteous but aloof, and I sensed she considered me embarrassing. Mark disappeared from my view as the years passed. His high-powered career and new way of life occupied him. Our talks felt surface level. Although I missed my kid, I reminded myself that this was inevitable in raising a new family. Then, around 6 months ago, I decided to do something that would fundamentally alter everything. I chose to call it quits on instruction. After 40 years in the classroom, I thought it was time. I was 65. Having extra free time excited me. Maybe I could go on vacation or pick up a new hobby. Mark's response when I informed him I wanted to retire startled me. He appeared worried rather than delighted for me, inquiring about my financial condition. He wanted to know whether I had enough stored up. I reassured him that throughout the years I had been frugal with my money and had a reasonable pension. Though I wasn't wealthy by any means, I had enough to live reasonably. Mark began phoning more regularly over the next 2 weeks. Every time, he would bring up the notion of me selling the house. He discussed how I might help them at home and how everyone would benefit from it. His tenacity began to irritate me. Then, about a month after I retired, Mark and Chloe showed up at my place without warning. They claimed to want to discuss my housing circumstances. Chloe spoke much of the time, outlining their intended family starting point and how great it would be to have me there to assist with the grandchildren. Her voice, though, seemed strange. She seemed to be pitching me something. It was obvious as the discussion progressed what they truly desired. Though they needed more money for the down payment, they were looking at a larger house in an even more upscale area. They reasoned that if I sold my house and lived with them, I could put the money toward their new house. I would have a room in their house in exchange and live among their family. Using the promise of family intimacy to gain my money, they seemed to be trying to control me. I told them straight out I had no intention of selling my house or investing in theirs. Mark was irate, but Chloe remained calm and said they were simply trying to support me. I shook when they went. My kid, the small lad I had reared on my own, would try to pressure me in this way. I couldn't believe it. Over the next few days, I considered our relationship and sought to identify when things had gone so wrong. 1 week later, Mark gave a call. This time, his voice was different. He claimed they had no option but to handle things, as I was not ready to be sensible. He told me the house I was living in belonged really to him. I remembered putting the house in both our names when Mark turned 18, even though I had bought it when he was a small boy, never expecting he would turn it against me. I saw it as a means of ensuring his future. Mark claimed to be co-owner and intended to sell the house, as he was entitled to do so. What I was hearing rankled me. My own kid was threatening to sell the roof over my head, saying that this was my house. I objected. Mark said, "You're retired now, Dad. You simply are an old, useless man. Chloe and I have a future." The next several weeks were a misery. Beginning to show real estate brokers, Mark and Chloe insisted on offering house tours. They dismissed my objections as though I were not even there. Watching strangers move through my own house, I felt like a ghost. I once listened in the kitchen as Chloe spoke with Mark. She didn't know I was in the room next door. "We have to clear the useless old bones from here," she remarked. "I find it amazing that you let him freeload for so long." Mark's answer was just as nasty. "Don't worry, we will have him gone shortly. He has had his time. Now it is ours." I collapsed. For now, the son I had given everything saw me as nothing more than a burden. Lost and alone, I didn't know what to do going forward. That's where I find myself right now. My son and daughter-in-law are aggressively trying to sell my house out from under me. They have made it abundantly evident that they consider me as nothing more than a worthless old bone getting in the way of their ambitions. About my future, I'm frightened, angry, and wounded. At 65, I never thought I would be in this situation, facing possible homelessness from the avarice of my own child. How did my relationship with my son get here? Update 1. It's been a month since I last posted, and I can't believe how much has transpired. The issue with Mark and Chloe has only worsened, and I find myself in a position I never imagined conceivable. Following my initial post, I resolved to take action. I couldn't simply sit back and let Mark and Chloe sell my house from beneath me. I contacted an old friend, Arthur, who was a lawyer. I've known Arthur since college, and he's always been there for me. When I explained the problem, he was outraged and offered to assist me pro gratis. Arthur investigated the legal issues of my circumstance. It turns out that while Mark's name appears on the deed, there are regulations that protect me as a long-term resident. Arthur stated that Mark could not simply force me out or sell the house without my approval. This gave me a little sense of relief, but I knew the war wasn't done. I decided to confront Mark and Chloe. I asked them over for supper, expecting that in a quiet, familiar setting, we could have a logical conversation. I spent the entire day preparing Mark's favorite meal, pot roast with all the fixings. It was the same dish I made for his birthday every year as he grew up. When they arrived, we sat down to eat, and it felt nearly like old times. We exchanged casual conversation regarding work and weather. I finally decided it was time to confront the elephant in the room. I informed them about my conversation with Arthur. I stated that what they were attempting to do was not only ethically reprehensible, but potentially unlawful. I hoped that the knowledge would cause them to reconsider their actions. Mark's reply did not meet my expectations. Instead of backing down, he became infuriated. He accused me of threatening him and attempting to influence him using legal jargon that I did not understand. Chloe jumped in, stating I was selfish and jeopardizing their future. I tried to remain cool, explaining that I was not threatening anyone. I just wanted to keep my house, where I had raised Mark and where we had shared so many memories. However, my comments appeared to go unheard. After dinner, Mark and Chloe stormed out, leaving me alone with a table full of half-eaten food. I spent the night reading through old photo albums, looking at images of Mark as he grew up. I couldn't connect the happy youngster in those images with the man attempting to take away my home. The next day, I received a letter from the law company that represents Mark and Chloe. They were disputing my right to stay in the residence, saying that Mark, as co-owner, had the authority to sell. The letter was full of legal jargon that I didn't understand, but the message was clear. they were willing to take this to court. I quickly called Arthur. He calmed me, but told me that court battles may be exhausting, both emotionally and financially. He warned me to be ready for a tough struggle. Over the next 3 weeks, my life was occupied by legal consultations and paperwork. Arthur was quite helpful, explaining everything in language I could understand and guiding me through the process. But it was exhausting. I couldn't sleep because I was so scared about what was about to happen. During this time, I also began reaching out to old acquaintances and coworkers. I hadn't realized how secluded I'd been in recent years, focusing solely on Mark and his family. It was a relief to reconnect with individuals who knew me and recalled what a good parent I had been to Mark. One of these individuals, my former coworker Helen, promised to let me stay with her if things became really terrible. It was comforting to know I had somewhere to go if the worst happened, but the prospect of leaving my home shattered my heart. As the legal battle progressed, Mark and Chloe's methods became increasingly aggressive. They began spreading stories across the neighborhood that I was mentally ill and needed to be placed in a care facility. Some neighbors I'd known for years began avoiding me, giving me weird stares as we passed on the street. Stress was having a toll on my health. I found myself always weary and lost my appetite. My doctor warned me about the consequences of stress at my age and recommended some sleep aids, but medications couldn't relieve the agony in my heart that accompanied every thought of Mark. Update 2. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and I had an unexpected visitor. It was Chloe's mother, Margaret. I had only met her a few times at family gatherings, and we had never been close. She appeared embarrassed as she stood on my porch, but I politely invited her in. Over a cup of tea, Margaret explained why she had come. She had overheard Mark and Chloe discussing their plans and was appalled. She told me that she and her husband had no idea what Mark and Chloe were doing and did not agree. Margaret apologized for her daughter's actions and offered to help in any way she could. After everything that had transpired, it was difficult to trust anyone connected to Mark and Chloe, but as we spoke, I could tell Margaret was genuinely distressed about the situation. She told anecdotes about her own father, who had lived with her in his latter years. She couldn't imagine treating a parent the same way Mark and Chloe treated me. Before she went, Margaret handed me an envelope. There was a large check inside. She encouraged me to accept it, stating it would help with legal bills or whatever else I needed. I was astonished by her generosity and attempted to reject it, but she wouldn't have it. She made me promise that I would let her know if I needed anything else. It was good to hear that not everyone in Mark's new family agreed with his conduct, but it also made me sad to think that my son's in-laws were treating me better than he was. The court battle dragged on. Mark and Chloe's lawyers were aggressive, launching every legal argument they could think of against us. Arthur was doing a wonderful job of defending me, but the constant back and forth was exhausting. On a particularly rough day, I found myself sitting in the garden, gazing at the old treehouse Mark and I had built together when he was 10. It was aged and faded, but still standing. I remembered the summer we spent building it, Mark's delight as we pounded each nail, and the pride in his eyes when we were done. Now, that same boy was attempting to take away the house where we had shared so many good memories. As I sat there deep in meditation, my phone vibrated with a text. It came from Mark, our first direct communication in weeks. The message was quick and cold. Dad, this is your final opportunity. Agree to sell your house and move in with us, or we'll make sure you get nothing. This was not the son I had reared. The Mark I knew would never have threatened his own father in this way. I did not respond to the text, but I did keep it. Arthur had told me to keep track of all communication between Mark and Chloe. The next day, I had a meeting set with Arthur to discuss our future strategy. As I was about to depart, I heard a disturbance outside. I peeked out the window and saw Mark and Chloe in the front yard, supervising a crew of workers putting up a for sale sign. I raced outdoors, wanting to know what was going on. Mark claimed they were simply preparing for the inevitable. I informed them they had no right to put up a sign because the house was not for sale. Chloe laughed and replied, "It will be soon enough, old man." I stood there helplessly, watching the workers finish putting up the sign. Neighbors started to emerge from their homes, curious about the disturbance. That night, I was unable to sleep. I continued repeating the day's events in my head, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. I found myself thinking about Eleanor and what she would say if she could see what our boy had become. The next morning, I awoke to see my front yard packed with people. Mark and Chloe had arranged an open house without my knowledge or consent. Potential buyers were roaming through my house, inspecting my belongings as if I weren't even present. I was infuriated. I called Arthur immediately, and he encouraged me to capture everything. So, I started filming and photographing the guests in my house, making sure to capture Mark and Chloe's features properly. Some of the potential purchasers became uneasy when they realized I was the homeowner and had not authorized this open house. As the day progressed, more and more people showed up. Mark and Chloe were excellent guests, taking people around my property and pointing out highlights as if they had the authority to market it. I overheard Chloe informing one couple that they were assisting her poor, bewildered father-in-law in making the transfer to assisted living. The brazen deception infuriated me. I attempted to speak with some of the possible purchasers to explain the issue, but Mark and Chloe kept interrupting me and guiding people away. At one point, Mark told someone that I was not quite right in the head. By the end of the day, I was both exhausted and heartbroken. After the last potential buyer had left, Mark and Chloe remained, apparently satisfied with themselves. Mark had the arrogance to tell me that the open house was a huge success, with several interested parties. He told me I should start packing my belongings. I could not handle it anymore. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt spilled forth. I told Mark just how I felt about him, how selfish and greedy he'd become. I reminded him of all the sacrifices I had made and the love I had shown him. I questioned him how he could do this to me, in remembrance of his mother. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a glimpse of the old Mark in his eyes, but when Chloe murmured something in his ear, his countenance hardened. He said I was living in the past and needed to recognize that things had changed. They then went, leaving me alone in the house, which no longer seemed like home. That night, I reached a choice. I couldn't keep living this way, always on edge, waiting for the next thing to happen. I needed to gain control of the situation. I called Arthur and informed him that I wanted to pursue more aggressive legal action. He cautioned me that things may get ugly, that Mark and Chloe might retaliate even more harshly, but I didn't care anymore. I needed to fight for my home and my dignity. The following few weeks were filled with legal meetings and court appearances. Mark and Chloe's lawyers threw everything they could at us, but Arthur was great. He produced evidence of their harassment, including video footage from the unauthorized open house. He battled over my rights as a long-term resident and co-owner of the property. Throughout it all, Mark and Chloe sat in the courtroom, chatting to each other and their lawyers while rarely glancing at me. It was as if they no longer saw me as a person, but as a barrier to be overcome. The stress of the legal struggle was getting to me. I lost weight and had difficulty sleeping. My doctor was concerned about my blood pressure and emphasized the significance of attempting to remain calm. But how could I remain calm while my own son attempted to make me homeless? As the court case reached its conclusion, I had another unexpected visit, this time from Chloe's father, Thomas. He, like his wife, appeared uneasy as he stood on my porch. I allowed him in, wondering what had brought him here. Thomas was straightforward. He informed me that he was ashamed of his daughter's actions and disappointed in Mark. He claimed that he and Margaret had raised Chloe to be better than this and couldn't understand what had changed her. Then, Thomas did something unexpected. He offered to buy out Mark and Chloe's half of my house. He stated he couldn't stand by while they destroyed our family for money. His offer startled me, and I had no idea how to answer. Thomas assured me that this was not charity. He said that he and Margaret had already planned to make Chloe and Mark a hefty down payment on a new house. Instead, they planned to use the money to buy out Mark's part in my residence. This way, I could stay in my home while Mark and Chloe received the money they desired. Thomas's kindness surpassed my expectations. It appeared too good to be true, the ideal solution to this misery. However, I was also suspicious. I'd been hurt too many times in the previous months to trust lightly. I told Thomas that I needed time to consider his offer and discuss it with my lawyer. He understood and handed me his card, asking me to phone him when I had made a decision. The next morning, I called Arthur and informed him of Thomas's offer. He cautioned me to tread cautiously. We agreed to meet with Thomas to discuss the details. The meeting was held in Arthur's office a few days later. Thomas brought his own lawyer, and we spent hours discussing the details of the proposition. By the end of the meeting, we had reached an arrangement that appeared fair to all. Under the terms of the agreement, Thomas would buy out Mark's part in the house, giving him and Chloe the funds they needed for their new home. In exchange, I would maintain full ownership of my home. Of course, there were some conditions. I had to commit not to sell the house for at least 5 years, and if I did decide to sell later, Mark and Chloe would have first refusal. It wasn't a flawless solution, but it was better than I could have expected. I would keep my home while Mark and Chloe would receive their money. Maybe, I thought, this will be the end of the war. I should have known better. When Mark and Chloe learned about the arrangement, they were enraged. They accused Thomas and Margaret of interfering, siding with me against their own daughter. Mark called me, raving about how I had turned his in-laws against him. I tried to explain that this was a fantastic solution for everyone and that they were still receiving what they wanted, but Mark refused to listen. He claimed I poisoned Chloe's parents against them and was manipulating everyone. Mark closed our talk by informing me he never wanted to see me again. He stated that he no longer regarded himself as having a father. These comments wounded worse than everything else that had transpired. Despite Mark and Chloe's misgivings, the transaction went through. Thomas bought out Mark's part in the house, making me the only owner. The legal proceedings had been concluded, and the for sale sign had been taken from my front yard. In the weeks that followed, I attempted to return to normal. I started taking better care of myself, eating correctly, and exercising. I heard through the grapevine that Mark and Chloe had purchased their dream home in the exclusive community they'd been looking at. I wondered if they were content, if the money and the large house were worth everything they'd done to obtain them. As the months went by, I gradually came to terms with everything. Final update. It's been a while, about 2 years after the court struggle finished. One day, I got an unexpected delivery in the mail. It came from Chloe's parents, Thomas and Margaret. The contents included a photo album and a letter. The letter mentioned that they had been browsing through old family photos and discovered several pictures of Mark from various family occasions throughout the years. They thought I'd want to have them. It was a wonderful gesture that I greatly appreciated. The last page of the album had a surprise. A recent photo of Mark and Chloe posing in front of their new home showed Chloe holding a little placard that read, "Baby on board." They were planning to become parents. I sat there for a long time, staring at the photograph. I was about to become a grandfather. It was something I had fantasized about for years, teaching my grandchildren to play catch or telling them goodnight stories. Now it was happening, but I didn't know if I'd ever get to meet this youngster. That night, I wrote Mark a note. I obtained their address from the return label in the letter. I congratulated him on the baby and expressed my happiness for him. I told him I understood if he didn't want me in his life, but I hoped we could reconcile someday. I told him I loved him and would always love him, no matter what happened. I mailed the letter the next day, not anticipating any reaction. Weeks passed, and I heard nothing. I tried to put it out of my mind and concentrate on the positive things in my life, but I couldn't stop thinking about Mark and the baby. Then, around 8 months after I submitted the letter, I was outside watering my flowers when a car pulled up. To my surprise, Mark exited. He looked different, older and more serious. He stood there for a bit, simply looking at me, before approaching and hugging me without saying anything. It was strange at first, but I could feel him relax, so I hugged back. We remained there for a moment, neither speaking. Mark's eyes welled up with emotions as we parted ways. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I'm so sorry." We stepped inside, and Mark shared his heart over cups of coffee. He told me how ashamed he was of his actions and how the burden of trying to fit into Chloe's environment had shifted his focus. He claimed that being a father made him understand how badly he had treated me. Mark stated that he and Chloe had been going through some difficult times. The stress of the new house, the baby on the way, and the guilt over what they'd done to me had all put a strain on their relationship. They'd started couples counseling, which had helped Mark see how far he'd wandered from the ideals I'd instilled in him. I listened to Mark's apology and explanation. As he spoke, I saw the guy I'd raised, the gentle, sensitive son who had been my best friend for so many years. But I could see changes in him. He was more mature and mindful of the implications of his behavior. Mark informed me about the baby, a young girl due in a few months. He explained that he and Chloe had done a lot of thinking and wanted me to be a part of their child's life. I was moved by the offer, but I made it clear that things could not simply return to normal. Too much had occurred. There had been too many harsh words and actions. If we were to continue our relationship, we needed to agree on new conditions. Mark understood. He advised we start slowly, perhaps meeting for coffee once a week, and gradually restore our friendship. I agreed. As Mark was leaving, he paused at the door. "Dad," he began, "I know I have no right to ask, but would you consider being present when the baby is born? I really want my daughter to meet her grandfather." The request astonished me and left me feeling conflicted. I wanted nothing more than to be present for my granddaughter's birth. But should I trust Mark and Chloe? Finally, I told Mark I would think about it. He nodded, acknowledging my hesitation. Over the next 2 months, Mark and I met for coffee on a regular basis, occasionally with Chloe. These sessions were frequently awkward at first, as we all danced around the elephant in the room. However, we gradually began to ease around each other. Chloe apologized for her role in what had occurred. She added that she had felt a lot of pressure from her parents to marry up and provide a specific lifestyle. She'd become engrossed with materialism and lost sight of what was truly important. Pregnancy had also served as a wake-up call for her. I appreciated Chloe's apologies, but as with Mark, I made it plain that re-establishing trust would take time. She seemed to understand and respect my boundaries. Mark called me 2 weeks before the due date, panicked. Chloe had gone into labor early and was on her way to the hospital. I did not hesitate to meet him there. I spent the following few hours pacing the hospital waiting room. Mark came out at regular intervals to provide me with updates. After what felt like a lifetime, Mark emerged with a big smile on his face. "Dad, do you want to meet your granddaughter?" I followed Mark inside the room. Chloe was in bed, fatigued but delighted, holding the tiniest, most precious little bundle I'd ever seen. Mark carefully removed the baby from Chloe and delivered her to me. "Dad, meet Sophia Eleanor." My granddaughter was stunning when I first held her. Her middle name is Eleanor, which is the name of my late wife. I looked at Mark and questioned him. He cracked a grin and continued. "We wanted her to have a piece of grandma, to honor the amazing parents who raised me." Over the next few months, I spent as much time as possible with Sophia. Mark and Chloe were fantastic in incorporating me into her life. My friendship with Mark and Chloe also improved. We talked more honestly about what had happened and worked through our concerns. So that is it. That is my experience over the last 2 years. I appreciate all of the helpful suggestions you've given me, but it's time for me to quit writing and spend more time with my family.